Testing. All right, this question comes from where I come from. I'm from Hokulani. So to Nitasha, people in my community, Hawaiians in my community, refer to our neighborhood, our home, our community as, quote, ghetto. Yeah? So marginal community. To Hoku, my dad growing up in Hokulani, he said, we're trying to get out of the lodi. It was hard work. Now I teach Hawaiian Pacific Studies because the idea was to get educated, and we're going back in the lodi, right? So if you're part of the resurgence, it presupposes that there are exceptions, but then you're educated, right? Which leads me to Michael's quote that where we find ourselves here, at this elitist colonial space, and then the last thing that Damon, I think that Damon ended with, the specific population, or indigenous specific population, which is a poor population. So my question, I've had this conversation with both Ty and Lisa, how does class figure into race in this conversation? Or how it's articulated with not just race, but indigeneity as well. I don't think race has been really well theorized in Hawaii or the broader Pacific.
In ethics studies, this is the class versus race question that we all had to address, yeah.
Class with, along
class with race, the intersection, yeah. For me, that's part of the academic elitism, is that as a tool, we articulate and try to understand our own experiences with the tools that we paid for, that we've been trained in. And that's the dilemma I've been struggling with my whole career. And so my response to your question is, more from if we engage indigeneity in the question of race versus class and reposition our sensibility from a familial, communal aspect, then we see that in our own families we're multi-class and we're interracial, etc. And so immediately from that position, it blurs those lines of class versus race. Now, if I'm understanding correctly, what role does that play in terms of, in the diaspora, leaving, the privilege of getting higher education, returning, do you get co-opted, do you go back to your roots? And it's always a struggle to stay grounded, obviously, because we are in a competitive environment where we're trying to get tenure, we're trying to get published. And so really the academic elitism I'm talking about that I guess I'm cautioning is that even within ethnic studies, even within native studies, because we are in a space of not just indigenous articulation, but we are in a space of meritocracy, we have to be mindful of that. And it's engaging indigeneity that I believe sparks our reflective imagination to do so. And reminds us, and then part of my presentation I cut off is because of time, in the interest of time, is that I'm doing interviews with the more recent generation of the Chamorro Renaissance, and some of the stuff Vince said early, the appropriation of hip hop, we're going to see some of that later. Slam poetry, the arts, murals, these are not homegrown stuff in our homelands. These are things that we picked up through the diaspora within underprivileged, underclass communities in urban settings, right? And so my response to this person at the University of Guam, one of my responses was hip-hop music, urban authenticity, African-American youth, East-West United States, sorry Vince for the East-West thing, in the transplanting of that, but not just the transplanting, the rearticulation through those avenues, through those bearing points, really complicates the class, race, indigeneity in a way that is empowering in terms of not just having the space of ethnic studies, having the space of native studies, but actually without indigeneity, it's just space. It's just like an empty room. So to occupy the seat at the table and resonate your voice, that's, the space alone isn't enough. That's my long-winded answer.
So I guess one thing I might suggest in this is, and I think it's alluded to in some of what's become before us, is there are indigenous ways of ordering difference. Samoans didn't think everyone was the same. And actually, if we recover some of those, particularly the genealogical dimensions of that difference and the place-based ones, so you belong to a particular particular village, there are distinctions within Indigenous societies that offer alternate ways of living with difference. And I think those have something to teach us in the present, not necessarily because we can reinstate them purely, but because they offer a genuine critique of the ways in which race and ethnicity have been incorporated into statecraft, and particularly a critique of the contemporary state, which is so driven and organises so powerfully particular schemes of difference, to the point where the most powerful moment in most empires is they racialise land. And once that has happened, it's very hard to undo it, and you need actually quite creative ways to build communities and practice that doesn't just reiterate those differences. And class is one of the problems. And if you draw on genealogy, what it does is it offers connection, and that includes connection to pathway wealth. So that's what the Polynesian diaspora has taught us, is that genealogy has been a way of sharing wealth transnationally, and that's one of its most powerful dimensions.
So on that note, please join me in thanking our